What we're going to talk about today is developing a social ecosystem. And this is the third part in our three-part webinar series entitled Social Listening, Social Intelligence, So What? We've got some special guests on the line today who are going to present a couple of case studies to back up the evidence that's presented at the beginning of the webinar. But before we jump into the content, just a couple of housekeeping items to mention. First of all, if you'd like to follow along on Twitter, you can follow along with the hashtag SynthesiaLive. You can leave your questions there or any comments that you might have. If you have a question that you'd like to be fielded and perhaps answered at the end of the webinar today, you can use the GoToMeeting question interface. We'll aggregate those questions and get to as many as we can at the end of the broadcast. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up by email. If it's a specific question for one of the speakers, please make sure you mention that in the question itself so that the right person can get back to you. Finally, we will send every attendee a PowerPoint and a recording of this broadcast later on this afternoon. So we're just going to jump right into it now. If I can get my screen to change. I lost my cursor. Okay, perfect. So the agenda for today is as follows. We're going to talk about a bit about ecosystems. We're going to start with a basic definition, and then we're going to dive deeper and deeper into what this concept of an ecosystem means within the digital world and then within the social world. Once I'm through with my story, I'm going to toss the mic over to our two guest speakers. The first will be Jamie Dadant from Smarty Social Media, and the second will be Joe Curry from Spreadfast. They're going to provide some kind of local color around the story that we put together here with some examples of exactly how a social ecosystem works in the wild. Once we're through with that, we will have some time at the end for some questions and answers. And as I mentioned, if you have a specific question for one of the speakers, please make sure you mention that in the question field when you put it into the interface. So just a brief bit about the three companies participating here today. My name is Greg Roth. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at Synthesio. I also head up our Data Insights division. So Synthesio, you know, our log line here is our passion for delivering best-in-class social intelligence. Has won us 2 consecutive Forrester Groundswell Awards, the last 2 consecutive Forrester Waves, and it's really made us the #1 listening provider worldwide. We've partnered here with Spreadfast and Smarty Social Media. Spreadfast is a social software company that works with brands, media, and agencies to make it easier for them to manage, integrate, and amplify their content. And Smarty Social Media is a boutique digital marketing agency. They're kind of like your social geek squad there to help you navigate the crazy web of social media. So you can see our contact information there if you want to learn more about each one of our companies. We're going to jump right into the concept of an ecosystem now. So when the topic of this webinar came to me and I was asked to put together some concepts and some story behind it, it was a basic idea of let's talk about social ecosystems, and I wanted to try to backtrack into my vision of what an ecosystem was. And when I thought about what an ecosystem is, I kind of had this vision in my head of an elementary school textbook where all of the animals and the trees and the grass and the mountains and the river were living happily within this, you know, self-contained environment, and everybody was all smiley. And that's how it was presented to us as we were kids. That an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. Well, it turns out that things are a little bit more complex than this in real life. So as you begin to learn more about ecosystems, you see that it really isn't this beautiful vision of nature working perfectly together. It's more about mutually assured survival. Basically, it's a complex web where if a single element within this crazy map fails, the whole system could suffer as a result. So you remove that rabbit, and all of a sudden, all the food sources kind of shift and change. So we're going to get into a bit about how ecosystems change and develop a little bit later in the broadcast. But the one thing that you need to know here when we're talking about ecosystems in general is that every piece of the ecosystem is integral to the overall functionality of how things work. So this concept of integration or destruction leads me to the digital ecosystem. So, I wanted to look for a really simple definition of how people think of what a digital ecosystem is. And what I found was a Deloitte paper which defined the digital ecosystem as an interconnected group of companies that specialize in development of hardware, content, and software applications and provide a platform for the creation, distribution, and consumption of content, applications, and services. And Deloitte shared a graphic which looked very similar to this, where it was basically your 5 key elements interconnected together in kind of a fancy Venn diagram form. And it makes everything seem really simple. You've got these 5 things, and they're connected with lines like 5 dots. Really simple. But as it turns out, it's a little bit more complex than that. So you're going to see, as I talk about digital ecosystems, that this philosophy of integrate or die began to emerge 15 years ago. It doesn't seem like 15 years is that long, but in the world of technology, it happens to be an incredibly long time. So 2001 was the 30th anniversary of the microprocessor. And on the left here, you can see this was probably the phone that you were using 15 years ago. There's the camera that you likely had, the desktop computer that was taking up all that room in your office. There's the original iPod released in 2001. That's what you wanted for Christmas that year. And then in the center there, you'll see Mark Zuckerberg, only 16 years old. He had just won his first coding contest. So it turns out that 2001 is a seminal year in technology. Many of the foundational paving stones for the open ecosystem revolution that was about to take place began to be laid down. Now, it's important to realize that just 10 years before this, or actually 25 years ago today, the World Wide Web was released to the world. So that was really the first stepping stone. But in my opinion, the second stepping stone was in 2001. And you can see that the technology released in 2001, Microsoft XP, iTunes launches, Napster reaches 26 million users. When we go through this list, you're going to be able to see some kind of common themes. So iTunes launches, Napster reaches 26 million users, USB 2.0 released, the Agile Manifesto is released, Google Image Search launches, BitTorrent launches, Wikipedia comes online. The one thing that kind of ties those few things together that I just mentioned is that there is some type of socially inspired connector within these platforms. So, iTunes launch in response to Napster reaching 26 million users. Napster was really, one of our first social networks. It was a place where people went to share music, and BitTorrent was one of the things that enabled that quick sharing of large files. Some of the other things on here, you can begin to see the slow death of some of these more legacy technologies. So AOL has a growth in membership for the last time in 2001. Microsoft's attempt at making a digital personal assistant, Clippy, dies in 2001. He's officially removed from all Microsoft software. Online gambling is legalized in Nevada, which is also a huge step in the progression towards a more social internet as people can begin to interact and play games together. Also, airlines began offering internet access online, which is really the beginning of people wanting to be able to access information at any time, anywhere, even when they're up in the sky. And then the one thing I didn't mention here was Xbox was released. So this was really kind of the last swan song of the platform video game industry. That first release of Xbox and the new PlayStation was right around this time. But the most seminal moment, and the one that really relates to what we're going to be talking about today, is the release of IntelliJ IDEA. It was the first integrated development environment released for Windows, Macs, and Linux, which allowed developers who are accustomed to coding for each one of those different devices and platforms to begin to cooperatively work together and build software that works across all machines. So what does this have to do with ecosystem? So I wanted to provide a little bit of historical and economic perspective here on the idea of a digital ecosystem. And I'm going to do that by looking at around 10 companies and their evolution from 2001 to 2016. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that the Fortune 500 in 2001, there were a handful of tech companies within the Fortune 500. The ones that I have listed here at the top from 8 to 107 were the ones that were the highest on the list. And then beneath that, you'll see Apple, Alphabet, and Amazon, which were really lagging behind. Now, when you flip the screen to 15 years later, it's almost as if the list has toppled over on its head. So Apple and Amazon are now at the top of the list rather than the bottom. And the thing that I think is really, really interesting here is that all of the companies that really flip-flopped were legacy technology companies. And what you're going to begin to see here is this battle emerging between old school and new school. So you have all of these tech titans, they're hardware focused, they do on-site installs, it's a super suite of software, and it's basically a philosophy of use all of our stuff or suffer the consequences of countless hours of frustrating plugin installs, shockwave crashes, and crazy stuff that just doesn't seem to display or work correctly. On the periphery of all of these tech titans who are really working within this legacy infrastructure are these three future titans who are laying in wait, and they're building the blocks that they need to set the stage for a more open internet 15 years later, so that when we do this flip, we see Apple, who was really at the forefront of this open ecosystem philosophy, and Amazon, who has always made it easier for third-party vendors to actually leverage their coding, their software, and their e-commerce system. And then Alphabet, which you'll see is Google, is number 36 on this list. And they actually, in my opinion, deserve to be higher, and you'll see why in 1 second. So this is our pivot to integrated ecosystems. You can see on the first column of 2001, that's the revenue for each one of these companies 15 years ago compared to the revenue from the past year. So the companies that you see at the top, Google, Amazon, and Apple, have seen tremendously exponential growth in the last 15 years. Alphabet, the greatest, at over 105,000% growth. Amazon, 3,000. Apple, 3,000. Now, when you look at all the other companies on this list, they have some respectable growth numbers, particularly Microsoft and Oracle, who are kind of on the periphery of this ecosystem, open ecosystem revolution. They waited some time before they began to embrace it, and as a result, they're seeing their profit grow greater than the other competitors on this list, but they still are laggards in terms of their development of this open technology. The thing here to notice also is that some of these more legacy players that I mentioned earlier, like Compaq and HP, they were merged together in 2001. HP acquired Compaq for $25 billion and then quickly shuttered the company. So there's a lot of hardware and desktop computer providers here, a lot of software providers that failed to pivot to this integrated ecosystem, and their growth has not been that great as a result. The real scary one here is IBM, which was in the previous slide, number 8 on the Fortune 500. They're the only one who noticed a decline in their growth over the last 15 years. And you know, obviously IBM is known for being one of those legacy tech titans that has not been all that quick to pivot. It's not just these huge companies on the Fortune 500 in 2001 that are moving towards open ecosystems and driving their revenue growth. So what I tried to do here on this chart is break it down into 2 separate groups of companies. On the top, you see 4 companies, Adobe, eBay, BlackBerry, and TiVo, who have all seen some great growth over the last 15 years. But when compared to Facebook, Uber, Netflix, and PayPal, you'll see that their figures are not even close in terms of the overall revenue growth. My rationale for this is that the companies at the top never really embraced this open ecosystem in the same way that the companies at the bottom did. Adobe has been notorious as having a closed platform. It's very difficult to access and use from other platforms. Their ecosystem works great together, but outside it can be very clunky and not user-friendly. eBay did not pivot as quickly as Amazon did when it came to making it easy for third-party merchants to sell their merchandise through an open platform. BlackBerry, we all know, really was the biggest sufferer of the release of the iPhone. They owned market share, and their inability to pivot to this open ecosystem really has caused their downfall. TiVo in 2001 was the piece of technology that everybody was talking about. For the first time, we were able to record live TV. TiVo, rather than pivoting in a way that Netflix did not open up their software for outside developers. In fact, they make the majority of their revenue today on patent lawsuits because most of the money that comes in their door is through licensing agreements with cable providers. So a lot of that revenue growth from TiVo is a result of lawsuits. On the bottom end of things here, you'll see Facebook wasn't even around in 2001, but it has grown over 11,000% since 2007. Uber, even greater numbers since 2013, 21,000% growth. Netflix, again, 8,000%. PayPal, 8,000%. All of these four companies have embraced the philosophy of the open ecosystem from the very beginning. Some of them were built upon that concept, like Uber. A company like Netflix was smart enough to make that quick pivot from DVDs to a platform which allowed them to release their content across devices, whether it's an Apple TV, an iPhone, a Chromecast, or a Roku, you were able to access Netflix. And PayPal was really one of the founders of this open movement. They were really the first company to offer open financial software, which made it very easy for new websites to integrate e-commerce elements that were trustworthy within their web experiences. So what's made this possible is the API, and I'm not going to get into a lot of technical detail about what the API is. You've probably heard an awful lot about how APIs work to allow different types of machines to communicate together. I'm essentially going to sum this up really simply. What you see next to the API here are two Babelfish. The Babelfish was an element within Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and essentially what it is a universal translator. So you drop one of these fish in your ear and you can understand and speak in any language, and that's essentially what the API does. It's this universal, I would say, junction box where any type of technology that is leveraging APIs and this idea of an open ecosystem can plug in, push data to another source, or pull data from another source. So this is what's allowing customer databases, business intelligence, e-commerce, digital media, social media, everything to communicate better together to make your business run more smoothly. So I'm going to look at this concept of a digital ecosystem really quickly through a few different lenses so that you can see what type of economic impact that digital ecosystems have on the world. So Apple, in my opinion, is the true leader in ecosystem technology. Google, is right up there with them. But since I'm an Apple user, I decided to use them for this example. So you can see here Apple logo sitting in the middle of a 12-pointed shape, and each one of these points shoots off into another part of the ecosystem. So you can see hardware, software, data, telecom, accessories. All of these different types of verticals are dependent upon Apple, the iPhone, their computers, the Apple TV, in order to do their business. So whether they're suppliers, whether they're building on top of Apple's infrastructure, whether it's just Apple's retail locations and the people who work there, you can see there's a tremendous portion of the economy just being driven through a single digital ecosystem. And when you look at each one of those verticals that are attached to the Apple logo, each one of those has also a 12-pointed shape around it. So in actuality, this is like a virus. Each one of those 12 pointed shapes is going to spider out into another group of partners. So the ecosystem is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Now, when you look at Apple through a magnifying glass, what I tried to do was look at what I do with my phone on a day-to-day basis. And you can see the inner ring of the app icons here around the Apple icon itself are the native apps that come with the iPhone, excuse me. And these native apps that come with the iPhone are all bundled together, and Apple would love if you use them. The problem is that not that many people actually use these native apps. So what I did is I went through all the native apps and I chose my replacements for each one of these things. And this is all based on this concept of the open ecosystem. You have all of these different developers developing software for a single device. Maybe it's for both iOS and Android, but what they're trying to do is replace the native software with best-in-breed functionality that's going to give the user a better experience than they would have gotten if they had stuck with native. So you see Waze here, Facebook Messenger, Skype, Evernote, Twitter, all of these are built upon this concept of the open ecosystem. We can dive in a little bit deeper here through a microscope to see what the ecosystem looks like just for an individual app. So when we're looking at Apple Maps, you can see that again we have this 12-pointed shape spreading out to 12 different companies which alone support the Apple Maps app. So you have a whole bunch of mapping GPS companies and a whole bunch of business intelligence companies that are all feeding data into just the Apple Maps app. This is not even taking into account all of the partners that Google might have for their mapping technology or Waze might have for theirs. So you can see economically just a single app is driving a tremendous portion of business just through the partners that are building on top of it within this open ecosystem. So this finally brings us to a social ecosystem, and how does this relate to everything that we're talking about? Well, what I wanted to try to show here on this slide is what most people's perception of a social ecosystem is. They think that it's all the social networks where your business has profiles that need to be maintained. But when you look at it like this and you picture a social ecosystem as just your list of channels that need to be maintained on a day-to-day basis, it begins to look like this encroaching horde of zombies, which can only be staved off with a constant barrage of posts and response. So you're constantly have all of this messaging coming at you from all sides, and you're just getting overwhelmed. And obviously in life things are a bit more complex than that. So you can see here in our more complex view, you've probably deployed some software. Maybe they're independent solutions that don't work together, or maybe you've signed up for a social suite, but you're still siloed and overwhelmed because the systems don't talk to each other, or they don't talk to each other well, or the suite is an untamable beast, and you might know how to use maybe 10% of its functionality. Because when you're dealing with suites, they don't do the best for each piece of functionality. They try to give you what you might need for each piece of functionality. And then when you're dealing with non-integrated software, you might be getting the best in breed, but it's not talking, it's not communicating with the other systems you're using. So it's just putting you further and further away from your goal of managing this horde of social zombies. And then in addition to that, what it's doing is making it more and more difficult for you to streamline your business processes in the long term. So that brings us to this so what moment, and I think that this is in 2015 where many, many businesses find themselves. Back in 2008, they started to set the stage for building their social profiles. They were controlling their reputation, maybe picking out a few influencers and monitoring their competitors. Over time, you begin to look at your data and find customer insights, and you're engaging with your audiences across social networks. And now all of a sudden you've reached this kind of intelligent campaign point where you can use your past data to inform future marketing initiatives. And then that's pretty much where many, many companies stall out. They reach this so what moment where you're trying to figure out what to do next when it comes to listening and engagement, and to how to better control your social audiences. Because again, like those posts, they just keep coming in, and more social networks keep getting added every single day, and your audience is spreading out. and it's just becoming, you know, this situation where you don't know what to do, and you're kind of throwing your hands up in the air and saying, so what, things are controlled, you know, I'm posting and responding and my audience is okay, I'm not hearing that many complaints. What we want to try to do for you is redefine the concept of a social ecosystem, take it away from that kind of net of posting and responding, and bring it to a more elevated place. So our idea of what a social ecosystem is an interconnected network of software that works together to provide businesses with best-in-breed tools to manage all of their social media needs. This goes back to what I was saying about the Apple ecosystem or the Google ecosystem, in that what we think is the best way for you to drive business success is using best-in-breed tools, just as you might use best-in-breed apps on your phone. And what you see here is you're the business owner and you're sitting in the middle of this honeycomb. It's one of nature's most simple and complex creation. Everything fits together perfectly, everything communicates together perfectly, so that when we move to the next slide, you can see that you now have visibility of your social audience from all angles. So now when this zombie horde encroaches, you've got this impenetrable fortress where each piece of integrated software is a turret of full visibility. So this is how people used to build their castles back in medieval times. If you look at the honeycomb on the outside, you see that there are no blind spots, that nobody can sneak up and attack. So everything is tied together perfectly in this honeycomb, which leads me to a bit of an anecdote. For a couple of minutes here, I'm going to share a story with you that relates to this whole concept of ecosystems, and then I'm going to tie it together with an analogy. So there's a very popular viral video. It's been around for several years. It's called How Wolves Change Rivers. You can see here that it's gotten over 25 million views by now on YouTube. And to just sum things up, what this video talks about is this idea of a trophic cascade, which is an ecological process that starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles down. So in 1995, Yellowstone Park was really a barren disaster. Deer had gotten out of control. They'd grazed away all of the vegetation. All of the riverbanks were collapsing as a result of the massive amount of deer which were taking over the park. Now, what they did to try to change the way things were digressing in Yellowstone was they brought in just a few wolves to kind of add a new element into this ecosystem. And at first, the deer, you know, a couple of deer got killed by wolves, but then something major began to happen. The deer's behavior began to change as the wolves drove them away from the valleys and gorges where they could be hunted and cornered. So as a result of this, vegetation started to grow, and in 60 years, vegetation quintupled, and these bare valleys became forests. As a result of the valleys becoming forests, birds returned, then beavers returned, and these guys are ecosystem engineers who created dams that created new habitats for otters and ducks and reptiles. And then, since the deer were all kind of driven out of the natural hunting area, wolves then took down the coyotes, which are kind of like your brand detractors. These are the trolls that are out there. So once the wolves took down the coyotes, the rabbits and the mice population began to rise since there was nothing to hunt them, which led to a rise in the population of fox, weasels, hawks, and badgers, which were now eating all the mice and rabbits. Then eagles and vultures and bears increased because there was a larger amount of carrion for them to feed off on the forest floor. And then the really, truly amazing thing happened. The rivers began to change as a result of the fact that the deer were moving away from the valleys, so they meandered less. There was less erosion and more pools, which were great for new habitats for animals. So this regenerating forest stabilized the riverbanks, there was less soil erosion, and the deer were driven farther away from the valleys. So the wolves literally changed the ecosystem, river and all. It was a totally burnt out landscape, and it became a paradise. So here's my metaphor then. You basically have a choice here. You're the park ranger in this case. You're your business owner, and you're controlling all of your social media output. And you have a choice in your barren wasteland of a national park. You can deploy a lion. It's an all-in-one social suite, in my opinion. The lion is one of nature's fiercest killers, but it's also lazy. It does some things great, but other things not so great. So he might knock off a few deer, but because he spends most of his time sleeping, those deer are still going to congregate at the rivers and your ecosystem is not going to change. You can continue to say, so what, which obviously is not the right idea when it comes to changing the way you do business, or you can deploy this wolf pack. The wolf pack represents integrated software. So as the leader of your business, do you want to change your social ecosystem? Then let loose the wolves. So in this metaphor, you are the alpha. Your company is the alpha wolf. You're the pack leader that tasks your compatriots with specific duties. You communicate seamlessly so that all work together for the common good. So as the pack leader here, you are sitting in the middle of social intelligence, publishing and engagement, CRM, marketing activation, social advertising, and business intelligence. And each one of these pieces of technology is operating independently, but also in an integrated manner to provide your business with more insights, more value, and hopefully more revenue down the road. Now, the way that we're going to do this is that you, as the business owner controlling the pack, are going to be able, at this point, to tag, identify, segment, and control your audience. You're going to drive them away from the valleys and rivers, and you're going to be able to break them up into smaller groups. These small herds are easier to observe and track, and that's really when you're going to be able to learn about the deer's behavior. Obviously, the deer here are standing in for your customers, so once they're segmented and their behavior is controlled and you're beginning to be able to observe them, over time, the intelligence that you gain from segmenting this audience and controlling them and keeping them in the places where they belong with the content that resonates most with them, this impact is going to have a major effect on other levels of your organization. So in terms of how this social ecosystem works, this is the first time that a complex map is actually simpler than it looks. So in the middle, we have that complex honeycomb. At each point of the honeycomb, we have your pack, which has been deployed to handle all incoming messaging, whether it's coming from your website, from complaints and questions on Facebook, from comments on Twitter, from paid media, from mobile. And what we're going to be able to do within this social ecosystem is pass those customers, those leads, from one system to the next. So if somebody is making a mention on Twitter, we'll pull that mention into social intelligence. We'll escalate that if it's a negative mention to social publishing and engagement. That customer's name and information will be stored in our CRM. We'll be able to reach out to them later on through our map. We'll be able to learn a lot more about their historical behavior through business intelligence, and we'll be able to use all of this consumer data to more effectively target our ads on social advertising. This leads us to the end of our story, this happy integrated ecosystem, which really matches up with my vision of what an ecosystem should look like based on the textbook pictures from my childhood. So the real piece of intel to grab out of this is that ecosystems typically are going to work a lot better for you when it comes to controlling all of your business processes and learning more about your customers, because the robust set of features and functionalities within a best-in-breed piece of software is always going to drive more success for your business. So in looking at this simple but complex vision, you can see that we've got mutually assured survival in which all parts of the ecosystem individually contribute to the overall health of the organization. Everything's working together, everything's communicating together, and obviously we hope that that leads to business success. So what we're going to do now is transition into a couple of guest speakers. So our first guest speaker from Smarty Social Media is Jamie Dadan. And what Jamie is going to do is going to talk to us a bit about a social ecosystem in action, how Smarty Social Media leverages a social ecosystem to garner customer success. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie right now.
Great stuff. Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. My name's Jamie Dadan, and I currently consult for Smarty Social Media, an interactive marketing agency. Part of my role at Smarty is to manage social listening for our clients. Social listening is a very important area for our business because we work with FDA Regulated Brands, but we'll dive more into that a bit later. Slide. So why social listening? Through social listening, we're able to monitor not only what's happening on our clients' social media channels, but we're also able to listen to what's being said across the entire web as well. We can gain insight into what is being said about the brands we work with, a brand's online sentiment, and we can also alert clients to impending customer service issues. We do this by first setting up queries. Here's an example of what a query would look like if we wanted to track potential customer service issues. Across the web, if there is a mention with the brand name and one of the keywords seen here, we're able to review in order to determine if a customer needs help. Slide. How is this different when monitoring and listening for an FDA regulated brand? Well, when working with FDA regulated brands, we're tasked with alerting clients of potential issues that need to be reported to the FDA. For example, let's say someone is using a medical device and experiences an adverse event, maybe an allergic reaction or a migraine as a result of using the product. The FDA needs to be notified. So we set up queries to capture these mentions. For example, if we had a query set up to track brand name and allergic, we would have visibility into the mentions seen here, even if the brand was not tagged. With that being said, it is critical for us to have a robust tool that allows us to capture the information we need and pass that information on to our client. Slide. Before diving into the solution, I'd like to first share some history. Last year, we were using two completely separate tools, one tool for social listening and one for engagement. The challenge with that approach was that, one, we weren't able to work as efficiently. Managing two separate tools was very time-consuming. Second, when it came to reporting, we were pulling data from two different sources. We needed a solution that would provide a full consolidated report. By transitioning to Spreadfast and Synthesio, we're now able to handle a large volume of issues in less time. The integration helps our team respond more quickly because we're able to sift through mentions more efficiently. We currently use the features of Spreadfast to build and run client campaigns, identify trends related to our clients' industry and interests, and engage with our clients' audience. Then we use the power of Synthesio to track total social mentions of brand, uncover overall sentiment, understand how a client is performing in the market, and track a client's competitors. Through the integration of these two tools, we're able to monitor Synthesio mentions within Spreadfast. The best part is that we're able to use Spreadfast functionality to make the monitoring process easier. So utilizing Spreadfast functionality, we're able to engage with a mention, label, and also assign a mention to another team member. Slide. The Spreadfast and Synthesio integration has really helped us manage our growth. Here are some proven results that I'm excited to share with you. We are currently handling 48% more social customer service issues than we were at this time last year. We're able to support 15% more followers across our client social channels. And lastly, our response rate on Twitter has been 336% faster than our response rate historically. Circling back to Greg's analogy earlier, we see this integration as our Wolfpack solution.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We're going to move on to Joe Curry right now from Spreadfast, who is going to give us some solid evidence to support the efficiency of the social ecosystem concept. Joe, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. As I mentioned, my name's Joe Curry. I'm from Spreadfast, where we've built software that basically allows you to connect to the consumers that you guys care about the most. And that's both on the social channels, but also using social data on any digital channel, in venue, web, mobile apps, or even broadcast TV. So what I do at Spreadfast is run our strategic partner ecosystem, and you just saw from Jamie a great detailed example of our ecosystem approach in action with her. So you might be wondering kind of why else would an ecosystem approach be useful? So we'll dive into another example here in a minute. So as you saw from Jamie, combining best-of-breed social solutions really allows her team to grow both their operations and their efficiencies. Another way that social tools can combine together to help you out, though, is to help you identify the most pressing topics right now on social and then apply the knowledge to your day-to-day work. So let me introduce you into what we like to call here at Spreadfast the social iceberg. The one-to-many tweets seen from brands might get all the public attention on those channels, but really the wide majority of social content wasn't meant for the general public to see necessarily. So in a study that we did at Spreadfast earlier this year, we learned that over 93% of tweets in 2015 were one-to-one communications between a brand and a single person, which was pretty staggering. The percentage varied obviously by brand, of course, but the rate of personal communication was more than 85% for the vast majority of the brands that we studied. And as this trend kind of continues to grow, the one-to-one connections on Twitter increased to nearly 95% of all brand tweets by the last quarter of 2015. If you go a couple more slides, Greg.
Sure.
Yep, perfect. So what does really this mean for you, and specifically for your social ecosystem? Basically it means a robust, modern social media strategy that's not only about getting retweets and likes. It's really, also about providing a dependable and effective one-to-one marketing strategy, which you can inform with deep listening tools like Synthesio, and then act on those with your engagement technology like Spreadfast. So by researching for mentions of your brand, you can inform that strategy for how and when to respond, not just to the tip of the iceberg, but to the whole picture. There's a big difference, as well between social customer service and social customer care. The goal is to truly elevate your one-to-one strategy by preparing for surprise and delight moments with your customers, which can sometimes start as a personal message, right? But also spread as a one-to-many message to a broader audience. The social iceberg shows us, with all the questions around social media's place in the marketing world, we shouldn't forget that social teams everywhere are leveraging this platform to devote the majority of their time to connect with individuals, address their concerns, and then solve problems for those consumers at scale. Another way to look at the social space, though, is to think about it in terms of social maturity versus message type. So every quarter, us at Spreadfast, we do a state of social assessment where we check in with 50 of the top brands in the world and assess their sophistication across their major social properties. So with this review, what's interesting is that we're able to gauge the social maturity of these different brands and industries, and our maturity level is based on a number of metrics, including audience size, consistency of response, post frequency, use of rich media, and even audience engagement. And so what we learned, using those metrics in our last assessment was that certain verticals are actually more mature socially than others, right? And so the sports vertical, interestingly enough, was the leader in social maturity in our last report, earning high marks on almost every single social platform out there. So media was a close second, which, yep, there you go, Greg, thanks. Followed by retail, which as an industry had, the most consistently solid presence across all the different platforms. So, why does social maturity matter when you're discussing this ecosystem approach that, Greg and Jamie have been talking about? Well, socially mature companies understand that it's not just as it's important to have these best-of-breed social tools, it's also critical to connect those social insights to the broader org. And so connecting those insights to even the broader digital marketing team or enterprise-level technologies across the org can go a long way in helping you get the most value out of your social network outside of the social team. So, our main point here is that social is not a silo. It actually can't be a silo. So when we think about openness, we think about the rest of your ecosystem, we're really making sure that we understand what other technologies you're using out there in both the marketing and enterprise technology stacks. Having a best-of-breed ecosystem, overall, what we think is it really sets you up for success, because in 2 years, if you think about it, social will be integrated into all of your different workflows across the org. When you're doing an email campaign, you're going to stop and think, let me pop over here into the social world. Let me see what I can learn from them. Let me compare who's hanging out with me on social to who I'm emailing in this campaign. And then, let's double check whether they're talking about the same things. Let's improve our targeting by deeply understanding the audiences on social, for instance. And so, that's really our main point. Lastly, I just wanted to thank Synthesio for their partnership. We've seen a ton of joint customers, like Jamie, appreciate you guys and also our best-of-breed approach overall to really solve these enterprise-level needs with an ecosystem approach. So with that, I think we're going to throw it back to Greg for some Q&A.
Thank you, Joe. So we're going to keep you on the line here. We've collected the questions throughout the broadcast, and Joe, the first question is for you from Robin S. She wants to know, how has SpreadFast been able to integrate with other technologies other than social intelligence?
Oh, that's a great question. Social intelligence is a huge part of our ecosystem. As you just noticed on that last slide, there are probably 10 to 12 other groups of people, both in social and marketing and digital technologies, even enterprise technologies that we partner with. I think another good example is a cross-channel planning partner that is really solving needs for their customers that include email and web teams, having them really upstream in the creative process, collaborate and ideate holistically on the storylines of what their marketing stories are going to be more broadly, right? And social is a specific component of that. And so even though they're looking upstream, before they even select which channels they're going to be publishing on, they're doing that collaboration and creative process that our teams want to have synced with the social specific planning attributes and calendaring that we have in SpreadFast. And so what that really does, again, is just connect the social team to the rest of the marketing organization in a seamless way, so they can have the creative team have seamless input from a technological perspective into the social plan that they're executing every single day on those channels. So that would probably be one of my other kind of favorite groups of partners that we have.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Jamie, we have a question for you from Gordon T. He wants to know what kind of content brings in the most engagement for your clients.
Great. Yeah, good question. So I would say our best performing content is actually UGC, user-generated content. We monitor daily hashtags related to anything that our client's brand, anything related, and we're looking for content out there that fans and followers are posting, and we're able to ask permission to use on our clients' social pages, and it performs really well for us. I think because it's just such authentic content, and people really relate to that. So I would say UGC is definitely our best performing.
Awesome. We'll take one more question in the time that we have left. This one is for me. I'll field it. Archie S. wants to know, are there any unique best practices for developing a social ecosystem for specific verticals? Well, yeah, obviously there are going to be best practices for each specific vertical. The examples we heard today were really focused on customer care, customer service, but obviously not every business has customer care as their primary concern. So when it comes to unique best practices for developing the social ecosystem, I obviously would say it starts with what are the most pressing needs of the business. If the most pressing needs of your business are really to begin to aggregate and learn more about your existing customers, then maybe CRM is the first phase of integrating into your social ecosystem. If you have a lot of marketing activation that you need to be done, email programs, you're sending out a lot of media perhaps, then it's all dependent upon the goals of your business. Now, outside of customer care, I think that one of the things that's greatest about this social ecosystem integrating together is the ability to match the individual customers within your CRM to the social profiles that are using mentions or posting about your brand. So this concept of matching a social user to the actual customer email and information that you have in your CRM, I think is my favorite use case when it comes to the ecosystem, outside of obviously the publishing, engagement, social intelligence, because I think that that's the biggest no-brainer here in terms of setting up your ecosystem. Those should obviously be your first two steps because they keep the zombies from attacking the castle. So looks like we've run out of time for today. If you've put a question onto Twitter or within the chat interface, we will be sure to get back to you via email later today. And in addition, as I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, we'll also be sending you a copy of the presentation and a recording of the broadcast. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Joe, for your great insights into the social ecosystem in action. And we hope to see you again at the third part of our webinar series, So What? Social Intelligence. The next part will be about finding stories in your social data. Thank you very much, and please keep track of all three companies across our Twitter accounts, and have a great day.